What is the drug and criminal situation?
uh, Out of control, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's to some degree these things kind of come in waves, but all the waves are big. There's a lot of impunity, like so just no punishing.
Yeah.
And so in some places, like in Rio, it's just open war. I remember a few years ago. I mean, this was at the height of the Syrian civil war, which was what 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There were more murders in Brazil than there were war deaths in Syria. So there's a lot of violent crime, and a lot of people have stories, and it shapes the society. The population is also disarmed now. So about 25 years ago, Brazilians were disarmed. There's open war between criminals and the police. So a few years ago, there was a man rampaging through Dallas, killing cops.
Yep.
That is just life in Brazil. Like if people know you're a cop, if the bad guys know you're a cop, they'll try to kill you just because you're a cop. Like there's no other purpose to it. Like than that you're a cop, you're an enemy soldier.
Right. Does that work its way through the cities, or is that kind of on the outskirts?
No, it's in the cities.
Okay.
That being said, like outskirts is an interesting phrase because we're in the United States, we have the inner cities, and that's kind of understood to be the more dangerous areas where gangs operate.
Right.
In Latin America, generally, not just in Brazil, the equivalent concept is actually the periphery. So downtown, the center, that's where the nice things are, and the bad neighborhoods, the gangs, they operate in the periphery,
like the suburbs.
The suburbs? Well, they're not suburbs really. They're a lot of slums and informal towns, but they're on the edge of the city.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're removed from the city. They're just there's never been the urban flight, right? Americans all wanted to leave the city and go create this suburban ideal that started becoming popular. That's never happened in Brazil.
Yeah.
So the poorer and working population gets pushed out or builds around the edges, and then that's where.
Is that drug operation? I would assume it's mostly drugs, correct? Drugs
Yeah,
and drugs.
that's right.
Is that working its way towards the U.S. or is that kind of internal?
It's internal because there's no production.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it's all internal. It's all about dealing. And it is the big thing to deal with in criminality in Brazil is the drug trade. But it's not like with Colombia or Mexico or different points in history, drugs have made their way through the U.S. No, it's actually a destination. A destination for drugs. So it's more about being able to sell to what Brazilians would call the playboys or the bourgeois. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And is it working its way? Can you kind of related to this? Can you explain the concept of a favela?
Yeah, and it's definitely connected to what I just said. Fundamentally, because things can get romanticized, right? So fundamentally, a favela is simply a slum.
Right.
But it can range from all sorts of things. It could be a shanty town. Cardboard and corrugated, or it could be an informally built neighborhood or town with, a surprising amount of infrastructure. There's favela tourism.
Right. Yeah.
And so, it's because there are a lot of different ways you could describe a favela. It's just the word for slum, but it's just become kind of romanticized a lot outside of Brazil. So, people might.
It's like it's living the simple life.
Yeah. That or super dangerous criminal place, and both those things have elements of truth. So if you want to actually just get a visual of what kind of like developed quote unquote favela might be like, which would be it's very different from slums, say in India or parts of Africa. Usually, there's a movie. It's a movie that's way better than its title suggests, called Elite Troop. That's the title in English, and it's about. So in 1998, the Pope went to visit Brazil, and he was insisting on speaking at a certain place, which was near one of these slums, one of these favelas. And the government of Rio was afraid that he might, not that someone would try to assassinate the Pope, but that he might catch a stray round.
It's not personal. It's just the way
Right.
it is. Yeah.
So there was this year-long operation to suppress crime in that particular slum. And it's basically war. Like these guys, there are special forces down there that are like Israeli level. Most of the cops are just bums, but there are units that are commandos.
Legit, yeah.
And they go up the hill is the expression, because most of these slums are on hills in cities. So but that movie, it's a kind of, it's an action. It definitely has a big political element. I think one that most of your viewers probably approve of, for whatever that's worth, as a police film, and the state versus criminality. Very interesting story, but you can watch it and kind of get an idea of what these informal towns look like. And I call them informal in the sense that a lot of them, and some of them never even, some of these informal towns never turn into slums, never turn into favelas. So it's actually quite common for, a city is growing, and the city government has to open up a certain area and say it can be developed, but people don't always wait, right? They just they siphon off power from some nearby like official city services. They start building pipes. The first couple of houses that went up, people were living with electricity and water, but they were, they'd rather do that near the city than out wherever they were from. And then things starts growing. And eventually the formal services start coming by, private and public. Like suddenly there's cable TV and satellite TV. But the city, the neighborhood, the area was already built up, but all hodgepodgey and mixed, and no building codes. And some of those places turn into slums, but some of them just become working class neighborhoods. It sort of depends on how you define them.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems like an odd juxtaposition between that and then a complete reliance on government to do all of a lot of the.
Right, so they're parallel societies, and some of them the state has no power or only enters to make war. And this is, gangs around the world always do this, but they buy your loyalty because they do good things for you, right? So the Mexican cartel, one of their guys gets killed, their mom gets money as if they were in the military, right? They'll build a bridge, they'll pay a hospital bill. And so a lot of these places in Brazil are actually run by a parallel state, a parallel government. And some of them have been wrested away from the control of drug dealers by militias.
Interesting.
Which then usually descend into criminality themselves.
Yeah.
But the criminality they tend toward, because they're not of traffic, as they say. So they kidnap and they rob and they take bounties, but they still end up abusing their people usually. And both the militias and the gangs build bridges because the city won't get around to it. So a lot of these places are absolute parallel states.
And these are private militias, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And they're sometimes from outside, like, not from like another state or something, but they're not from the neighborhood, but they see an opportunity to. So there's ideology mixed in, and the biggest gangs, they exercise none of this, but they, like one of them is called the Red Command, right? So communists in prisons in the 60s, there's nothing communist about them. But there's still this ideology of us against the state from them. And the militias are nowhere near as big as the thing with gangs. It's just an interesting phenomenon that they'll take over whole areas.
How safe is it for the people who actually live in the slums?
Well, there's huge variation there as well. I mean, there are actual safe favelas.
Yeah. But as far as the ones under gang control,
which in a place like Rio would be all of them,
right?
And this starts to drift outside my areas of expertise. But one of the things I emphasize to people when talking about, often just elsewhere in the world, is life goes on, right? Even in countries where there is war, like actual war between states or militias or whatever. So like in Beirut, life goes on. Most of life is still. And then there's a noteworthy story when peace came to Syria. There was a story about this guy who reopened his pistachio ice cream shop that his family had always owned. But it's so, and the same thing happens in Brazil, without wanting to minimize any of the precariousness of it or the violence or the abuse. People continue living,
right?
And so there's still commerce and there's still kids going to school or not. I mean, and it's again, like terrible things happen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people still go to work, and it's just, they just live under abusive people, and everything is that much harder, right? And very often it would not be any easier if the gangs were gone.
Yes. Right. Yeah. It's kind of, gangs seem to operate, as you mentioned, as a pseudo government, and there seems to be some level of almost fairness.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely want to walk the line. They are motivated to not push people to the point of rebelling. That being said,
they'll push pretty far.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one wants to get shot in the back of the head.
It's not.
So they can get away with a lot, and where like and they there's also like the PR side of the gangs, right? Like where the city fills in potholes, they're just doing their job. The gang fills in potholes, they have a party. Right. I mean, like they pay a hospital bill, they trumpet it from the rooftops.
Right.
I mean, like it's I by no means want to suggest that these entities are filling a vacuum positively. Not even the militias do that, right? Sometimes they do. With the militias, at least you see often a little bump, but then, I mean, then human nature kicks in, and the fact that they have absolute power where they are, where the police won't come in there. The first thing that needs to happen is impunity needs to go away. So whatever problems we think we have here in the States of repeat offenders, and it pales in comparison to what happens in Brazil. So you can commit all sorts of atrocities and never see any jail time.
Right.
Which is what then leads to war.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a scandal revolving around this for many years, but that is why these police, that police hit squads, and Brazilian ones have been famous in the past, emerge, right? Well, it's like these guys murder willy-nilly. You can't put anyone in jail if they're under 18. And so, of course, all your assassins are under 18. Same thing as throughout the world that happens if you have a law like that. Next thing you know, these
police get
hit squads are, exactly. Anyway, so that's just an example. That's just to show how pervasive the impunity is. So I think once impunity goes away, then there's a chance for political change. But impunity will not go away as long as Brazilians are swallowing the United Nations human rights based on humanness agenda.
Yeah. Or money, for that matter.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But there hasn't been any physical pushback from the gangs on the evangelical church, like
no.
the shutting down of churches, the execution of pastors, things like that. That's not happening.
No, every gangster's mom would would be in danger. Yeah, I mean, their moms go to the Assemblies of God.
That is funny. There's a personal conflict.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.